I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for tuning in. This is a two birds with one stone couple of segments. You often hear me say this is late Roman Republic stuff, and I'm hoping that you have muscle memory back to my long series on Plutarch and Tacitus with Dr. Larry Arnn, or my various conversations with people about Roman history when I say late Roman Republic stuff. But I also like in the summer, on the first day of summer, to introduce you to a new author. And one of my favorite reads is a fellow by the name of Robert Harris, who's never been on the show before. Now, you might have met Vince Flynn for the first time on this show, or Ken Follett, or Bernard Cornwell. Robert, welcome. It is good to see you. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Hi, very good to see you too, Hugh.
Now, you're a Cambridge man, and I think like William Dalrymple and Ken Follett, you're a man of the left. Am I right about that?
Broadly speaking, they're my sympathies, yes.
No, that's fine. We're not talking politics today. We're talking about the late Roman Republic. I want people to read the Cicero Trilogy so they'll understand. Even people who will not sit down with a history book will read a great novel. And the Cicero Trilogy is what I want to talk to you about today. Has it got legs? Do people keep reading it? Like, I just discovered it fairly recently. I read Fatherland like 15, 20 years ago, but I didn't know about your Cicero Trilogy. How does that do?
It does pretty well. It's just come out or a year or so ago in the UK in a single volume, which so it's a big book over 1,000 pages when it's all together because there are three novels, and that's the same in Italy and in Holland. One of the problems in the States with the Cicero trilogy is that two volumes were published by Simon and Schuster, and the third volume by Knopf. So it's sort of a bit split, but it's still out there. The novels can be read on their own, but it's best to read them in sequence. It begins with Imperium, and then Conspirata, and then Dictator, and it traces. Volume one is the rise of Cicero. Volume two is Cicero in power, and volume three is Cicero's fall from power and the familiar story of the assassination of Julius Caesar and all that.
Well, I
And
thought it was fabulous. By the way, whoever reads, it's very tricky. If you're an audiobook enthusiast, as I am, it's very tricky to find all three because they switch. Not only do they switch publishers, they switch audio producers for the third book, but the narration is fabulous and the books are fabulous. And I don't give that compliment out very often because I'm kind of serious about Roman history. I read the real thing as well as the adapted novels like yours and before yours, Colleen McCullough. But a lot of people won't do the hard work, especially as they get older, but they'll read a good novel, and this introduces them to what the phrase late Roman Republic means. Now, Robert Harris, when you hear me say that what's going on in the United States today is late Roman Republic stuff, what does that mean to you, given that you actually know your late Roman Republic stuff?
What it means to me is that you can't take for granted an ancient form of democracy, that it's constantly under attack. The Romans had a form of democracy. Okay, women couldn't vote, it was biased in favor of the rich and so on, but still, it was an astonishing form of democracy with annual elections, and they'd had it for centuries, longer actually than America has existed. And a supposition of people like Cicero was that it would always exist. And in 25 years, the whole thing collapsed. And so for me, the novels have a kind of parallel with democracy, not just in the United States, but all across the world. That is, that it's not the natural state of men and women to live in democracies, actually. And they can easily be overtaken. And there are many parallels in what happened to the ancient Roman Republic with what we see going on today.
I agree with this, and I don't want to be facile. I want to say that I think democracy is very sturdy. The Constitution is a very, very reliable document. The British Constitution continues to function quite well. But over the course of 25 years, if you abandon the custom and the self restraint upon which democracy is based, you end up with not just the Gracchi, but you end up with the first triumvirs and the second triumvirs. And poor people like Cicero stand in the middle trying to get people to pretend the rule of law matters, and it all collapses around them. So what alarms you the most in the current setting that makes you... let me ask this. Who strikes you as a Cicero-like figure on either side of the Atlantic right now?
Hard to see anyone with that degree of intelligence. Who, I mean, Cicero was a cunning and practical politician at the same time as being a philosopher and a brilliant orator. Such people we don't seem to see in politics anymore. And they were becoming rare in the Roman Republic, which was filled with a lot of pretty inadequate people who were running the show by the time you got to around kind of 50, 60 BC. So I think that the fundamental thing is that the Roman constitution was designed for a relatively small power, a citizen's kind of state, really, a city state, and that it became a huge empire and it had standing armies and it had a huge military infrastructure. And this kind of buckled the power system. People could become enormously rich. Pompey had the whole of the Eastern Mediterranean really financing him, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar had the whole of France, Gaul as it was then called, supporting him. So these were two immensely wealthy men, and they really bought elections. And the whole political process became mired in litigation for months, sometimes years. Consuls, who were elected annually, two of them at any one time, to run the country, they couldn't take office because there was so much legal stuff going on. And the other thing is that people no longer agreed what the Republic was for. And I think that that's one of the things that I find most striking now. There was no consensus as to why exactly this institution existed. What was the function of the country and the Republic? What was it supposed to do? And that was lost.
Yeah,
And then, so therefore, people just were willing to do anything for their side to win. There was no consensus of preserving the state.
that's it. No limit on what you will do to win. Now, I wrote a column for the Washington Post not long ago. I don't know if it ever showed up on your Google search, in which I mentioned your Cicero Trilogy. As I'm not really worried about a late Roman Republic resort to violence because we haven't got standing armies running around behind Sulla. And Caesar's not going to come back from Gaul with a few legions behind him to cross the Rubicon. But these massive concentrations of wealth are real. And they do have a parallel with the massive concentrations of wealth that Pompey and Crassus and others accumulated prior to that. The deployment of the wealth now doesn't build armies, it builds online presences. Has that occurred to you that that's the parallel that we have to worry about?
Yes, definitely. I'm afraid that I agree with you. And the really what brought down the Roman Republic was unscrupulous billionaires who posed as being anti-establishment and whipped up the masses to, in fact, literally storm the Capitol in ancient Roman Republican times. Uh, and there was a constant process of belittling every institution, so that everybody lost faith in the Senate. They thought, the Senate was just corrupt, and so they were licensed to burn it down, which is what they literally did. And so there was this constant underlying uneasiness and a kind of demagoguery, and in the end, nothing can withstand this. I'm also very
Yeah,
struck
Robert
by the
Harris,
extent.
it's been 50 years since I did my declining of Latin tenses, so I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce mos maiorum correctly. But would you explain to the audience what the mos maiorum is? Because I believe that's fracturing in the United States. We have one, people don't know it. The Brits have one, you know it. What is a mos maiorum for any country, and what did it mean in Rome?
Well, I think you better remind me of exactly what that means for you because I'm not altogether sure myself.
The traditions and customs that one does, like the courses of honors that you would run. You used to do things in order, and you couldn't become a consul till you were 42, I think. But then one by one, the old rules fell. Rules that had endured for a couple of hundred years fell by the wayside one by one. And I see in the United States right now we're talking about expanding the Supreme Court. That has not changed in 130 years. That would be a disaster if we expanded the number of justices on the Supreme Court, in my view. But it would be just another step away from our mos maiorum tradition.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. And yes, you're right. They started to give special sweeping powers to consuls, and to military commands, which were supposed to be time limited. They ceased to do that. They started to bend the rules. Um, the other point I was going to make is that the increasingly power passed into the hands of the mob, who could occupy the Senate, who could, howl down people they disliked, uh, a kind of lynch mob mentality. And there's no doubt that social media ha- reminds me of the Roman Forum and of a kind of mob mentality. That's one the moment the mob is here, and then suddenly we've got to lynch this guy, and it rush across to that, and this destabilizing effect of social media promotes demagoguery and promotes rule outside the normal structures of power, and anarchy is the result. And anarchy always calls forth the strong man who will reimpose order. And there
Now,
seems to be
there's a
something of
very interesting parallel. The first volume of the Cicero Trilogy is called Imperium. It came out in 2006. It all focuses on the trial of Verres. I think it's a fascinating, really a very, very necessary introduction into the role of the law courts in the late Roman Republic. We are engaged in a series of legal maneuvers in the United States now, and to a certain extent, Boris Johnson's censuring by Parliament is the same sort of public trial and public humiliation. That's sort of a precursor to everything. The rise of giantly famous and public entertainment court systems. Do you sense that that's developing as well?
I can't speak for the United States. Here, I would rather see that Parliament is struggling to contain demagoguery, lying, which Johnson seems to have done. Uh, they're trying to cling to the old rules.
Robert Harris, hang on for a second. I got to go to a break. My music is playing in my ear, which you cannot hear. Robert Harris is the author of many books, beginning with Fatherland in 1992, but the Cicero Trilogy begins with Imperium. Go and get it. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about what late Roman Republic means. My guest is Robert Harris, author extraordinaire, joining me from Great Britain. I'm very grateful for that, Robert. I'm talking about his three books, Imperium from 2006, Lustrum from 2009, and 2015 was, let me see here, Dictator. Robert, I am very curious from a technical, how much time does it take for you to learn the subject matter before you write the novel that makes the history accessible to the reader?
Well, in the case of the trilogy, I knew from the start it was going to be 3 volumes because I really just wanted to write. I mean, I was a political journalist. Politics fascinates me. I wrote a novel some people in America may have heard of or seen the movie, The Ghost, about Tony Blair, or kind of Tony Blair like prime minister and a ghostwriter on Martha's Vineyard. I've always been fascinated by politics. I wanted to write a kind of the original great political book about the struggle for power in ancient Rome. I conceived this idea and I knew it would take a long time. So the first 2 years were nothing but research. Literally, I did nothing else. I built up a research file over 500,000 words, a chronology of the 25 years I wanted to cover. And then I plotted out the books, and I started with the first one. I wanted to in media res, to use a Latin phrase. I wanted to cut in with a good story right from the beginning, and so it begins with this ambitious young senator, um, Marcus Tullius Cicero, who was a brilliant speaker, and he decides the best way to get on is to take down Verres, the corrupt governor of Sicily. And as you said, the first half of Imperium is taken up really with a great trial where he acts like a kind of ambitious district attorney, the kind of Theodore Roosevelt of the Roman
Yes.
era, I suppose.
Well,
Um,
I'm
and then,
fascinated.
and then
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, I want to know that when you took it to your publisher, I mean, it's written for people like me who love historical fiction. What did they say when you said, I want to do 3 books about Cicero? I mean, you're just coming off this enormous bestseller of The Fatherland, and you show up and you say, I want to do 3 books on ancient Rome. What do they say to you?
Well, I had just written a novel called Pompeii, which did
Yes,
well both in Britain. It was a big bestseller here, and actually a bestseller in America as
yes.
well. And so there was the publishers thought that this would be gold dust. Really, I think. I mean, in the end, the books have done well in England and in Germany, and the first one certainly did pretty well in the States. But I mean, I know I'm asking a lot of the reader to follow the life and career of this guy through the law courts and through the elections. And there's a kind of what a friend of mine called toga resistance, that people don't necessarily want to read books about people who lie down to eat and wear these strange costumes and so on. All I can say is, please, if you look beyond that, you'll find everything you really need to know about power and about making speeches and the law and philosophy and warfare and intrigue. It was all done more than 2,000 years ago, and our politics. I mean, your country in particular, with a Senate and with all the courts and the elected judiciary and so on. It was the founding fathers modeled it on ancient Rome.
Absolutely. Tom Ricks has written a pretty great book fairly recently about how deeply impacted the framers were by the Roman Republic and not by the late Roman Republic's collapse. And that's why I love the Cicero Trilogy too much and recommend it to everyone, beginning with Imperium. I listen to them. I encourage people on long car rides to get the audio version. Robert Harris, I want to make sure I know what you're working on next. It's like you're like Ken Follett. You never stop writing books. What's on the table right now?
Well, I've just brought out in the last year in America a book called Active Oblivion, which is all about the English Civil War and the two men who signed the King Charles I's death warrant, who fled to New England and were hunted across New England for more than a decade. And that is coming out in paperback in America in a couple of months. And I'm starting a novel now, just written about the first 10 pages of a novel set in Britain in 1914. And it's a kind of political intrigue novel and with espionage. So history fascinates me because I think if we, as Cicero said, people who are ignorant of the past are doomed to remain always a child, because what is the worth of a human life unless woven into the study of history by the lives of our ancestors?
Oh, so well said. I'm not going to improve on that. Sir Christopher Clark from Oxford has written a book called Sleepwalkers on that 1914 period. It's not accessible to people who won't spend 50 days reading it, but novels that do what you do serve the public so well, and I appreciate your efforts, and I encourage everyone to get Imperium. I'm going to go get Active Oblivion. I didn't know about that. I like the English Civil War. Thank you for joining me this morning, Robert Harris. Come back another time, and I encourage everyone, spend your summer with Robert Harris, and you will be better off for it. Start with Imperium, move on to Lustrum and to Conspiracy. Thank you so much for being with me.